Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. I'm Craig Jeffrey, your host for this episode. The episode is entitled Treasury Aggregators. As the world gets larger, how can we make it get smaller? I'm here with Paul Galloway, one of the senior advisors from Strategic Treasurer. Paul, I'm glad you could join me for another review on the Treasury Technology Analyst Report.
It's always a pleasure, Craig.
And I know we're splitting these up. I'm asking questions and the host on some of them, and you're doing the hosting duty as well for some of those. I'll point everybody to the show notes where you can download the report either directly from our website or click on the link in the show notes. We have 3 webinars: Treasury Management System, January 8th at 2 p.m., Treasury Aggregator webinar on February 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and the Treasury Supply Chain Finance Cash Conversion Cycle, and the Treasury Ecosystem on March 5th, 2 p.m. So, Paul, as we look at Treasury Aggregators and this idea of as the world gets larger, we need to make it smaller. So how can we make it smaller? That's the topic for today. So let's begin with, what is a Treasury Aggregator?
In simplest terms, a Treasury Aggregator is a provider that's able to connect to all your banks securely. So you can effectuate the transmission of data, information, and also payments. What makes them unique is that they can also connect to a company's ERP, a TMS, or to admin systems. If a company decides to change systems later down the road and they're connected to a Treasury Aggregator, what's really nice is that they can reconnect to the new system quite easily. They don't have to reconnect utilizing all the banks individually because they're already connected to the aggregator. So it's one connection versus many. So that's really efficient. This is also really good for companies that are highly complex, have a lot of banks, a lot of accounts. Having a Treasury Aggregator, centralizing all that also makes it really efficient for an organization.
One of the other aspects of a Treasury Aggregator has to do with transforming data and formats. How does that play out in companies? When is that oftentimes needed?
When you have companies that are really complex in terms of their payments, they're not doing just, let's say, they're not just a U.S. domestic payment bank. They are doing things internationally around the world. So they have a global footprint. There's a wide variety of payments out there, payment file types that are out there. It's not just, I'm doing wires and checks or ACHs. I'm doing things that are like ACHs in other countries. Maybe it's SEPA payments, maybe it's BACs, maybe it is that they are doing international wires, which can be challenging in certain countries to get them from A to B. There are different file formats. You take whether it's Europe or Asia or US, file types are different. What helps with a Treasury Aggregator is they're specialists in managing file types. They are able to take a file that either comes from the bank and needs to go to a treasury management system or an ERP or a reconciliation platform, and they can convert that information into the needed file format. Vice versa, if a payment file is coming from a treasury management system, they can convert it into the required file format for the bank. They do this very efficiently. They do it all the time. They're experts at it.
If you look in the analyst report on page 39, there's a breakout by category. So some of the names you'll see there for Treasury Aggregators and Treasury Aggregation are Axletree, Deluxe, ECS Fin, G Treasury, Necto, TIS. Now, aggregators connect to banks for payments, as you mentioned, and for information reporting. They connect to other sources as well for other types of data, let's say rates. But let's focus on the bank side. What are the 3 most common methods of connecting to, let's say, to banks or to banks information or to enable or initiate a payment or communicate about, let's say, a payment or a transaction?
I'll talk about kind of three core connections, one being networks, one being API, the other being host-to-host. These are common connections. When you think about networks, it's information collection, it's synthesizing, it's consolidating. And platforms tied to networks would be like Swift or eBix. The banks utilize these platforms quite often, and Treasury aggregators are keen to connecting to these networks efficiently and seamlessly. APIs, they're newer. We talked about those in our prior podcast when we talked about TMSs. API connection is becoming more and more prevalent. It is a new way of connecting. It is secure. It's quick. You can make these connections quite quickly. And we're seeing that there's an increase in API connectivity. So you're seeing Treasury aggregators are starting to step up to the plate from an API connectivity standpoint. There's still a need for host-to-host. Not all the banks out there are at the level that Tier 1 banks are when it comes to APIs. They're still being developed at Tier 2, Tier 3, maybe not as much, but we're starting to see some investment activity by these smaller banks to come up to speed with technology. Host-to-host connectivity is done typically through a secure file transfer protocol, or SFTP, where it's encrypted. You have connection between the Treasury aggregator, the bank, or the Treasury aggregator and a TMS or ERP or other admin system that's out there. But they do all these connections and they do it quite well.
Yeah. So, thanks for going through APIs, host-to-host networks like Swift and other ones that exist. So it's kind of like your phone, right? I want to talk to different people, but I use one phone. I don't have 12 phones to talk to 12 people. And it's also like having a translator. If you're talking to someone in languages you're not familiar with, they can do the translation back and forth. That's just on the information side. The payment side has quite a bit more as well. And I think it's important to note that there are some TMSs that have really focused on Treasury aggregation capabilities and would be a Treasury aggregator, but also have some of the other back-end processing. So at the same time, some Treasury aggregators add more visibility tools, more abilities to forecast. So there's this growing between those two areas where it was much more discrete before, where Treasury management systems almost exclusively dealt with Treasury payments, for example, and information reporting, from all banks. But now that continues to change. So a lot of activities going on. Now, you'd mentioned payment security and encryption. Anything about Treasury aggregators and how they are used, or how some people consider those, for providing better security around payments?
Being a Treasury aggregator where you're connecting to banks, you have lots of bank information, you're transmitting payments, or you're effectuating the ability to effectuate payments as a Treasury aggregator with corporates' bank accounts. Security is paramount, and they certainly are taking steps to ensure that there's encryption on data and different files and information. Companies just need to make sure they're doing their due diligence when they're looking at systems to ensure that it has the right level of security. Certainly, data encryption is needed. You need to make sure that they're using appropriate methods. You want to take a look at their data centers, make sure that they're SOC certified. So you got to do a little bit of looking under the hood and kicking the tires to make sure that they're going to provide that level of security that you want and you need. Having payments that are processed through a secure location, it's good because it's a narrow front. You don't have it going broadly. It's in a specified area where it can be more controlled. So if you are a large company that's highly complex in terms of its payments, the number of bank accounts and banks that you have, a Treasury aggregator that centralizes all this can provide greater visibility, which means better monitoring, better ability to detect anomalies, potential fraud. So I think a Treasury aggregator really helps with payment security.
So let's say you had mentioned different admin systems, AP, payroll, maybe Treasury systems that are all generating and managing payments, and you want to deliver that in a secure manner, in an efficient manner to the banks who are going to execute those transfers. Why would you use a Treasury aggregator? Some of the reasons are also not only is it secure delivery, but having the different types of acknowledgments come back and confirmations can be managed efficiently with the aggregator. Acknowledgement, negative acknowledgement, type 1, type 2, type 3, return of information to manage that, as opposed to in my individual underlying originating system, AP, payroll, admin system 1, 2, 3, or ERP number 2. If to do that, you'd have to do that with each of those systems, build that. And in the aggregator, you could build that confirmation process there. So you're having a tighter exchange of information, better flow. And that's just one example of where having an aggregator can make payment processes for the company more secure. May not even be more, if the treasurer is the superintendent of payments, they certainly want to make sure everything's secure, not just the treasury payments.
Really good comments, Craig. One of the other things that Treasury aggregators do is they do sanction filtering as well. There are organizations that perhaps have GIACT or their banks are doing filtering for them, but they provide another level of checks to ensure that there isn't payment fraud or payments going to organizations that are sanctioned. So I think that's another component that is important to note that Treasury aggregators provide.
Excellent point. We've been talking about things like the validation, compliance management, OFAC filtering, other types of sanction screening services, both validation, confirmation, screening functionality for a number of years. It's been a smaller percentage of companies are like, yeah, that's a good thing. It seemed like insurance companies, non-bank financial institutions got on that more readily, and then high volume payment providers followed along. Now it seems to be much more of a common discussions with firms like, how can we manage all of that? So really good points. I have the next two questions I have are really one and the same with a little bit of complexity. Is SWIFT dying? And that's not just meant to be provocative. I don't think SWIFT dying. We're a SWIFT partner. But certainly communication between banks, I don't think anybody questions that communication between banks makes most sense. But is the growth of things like, APIs, does that signal a decline in the use of SWIFT by corporations? And will that cause that part of it to die or diminish? And then secondly, again, maybe I am trying to be provocative, but with APIs expanding, will this help TAs, Treasury aggregators, or does this represent an existential threat? And that being is if you have an underlying system, your ERP, a treasury management system, a recon platform, if there's an API and you've got a single bank and you can just turn on that API, why would you add another party to that? So I guess the question is what will change with the growth of APIs?
Okay, I'll take SWIFT first. I don't believe SWIFT is dying. Obviously, APIs could be seen as a threat. One of the things that I'm seeing that SWIFT's doing, because I think they recognize that they need to continue to evolve. SWIFT's been around a long time. It's secure. It's easy for connectivity. It's very well established. So I don't think it's going away. Certainly not overnight by any means. I think it's still going to be around. It is a way to effectuate payments. So SWIFT file formats, I think, are still relevant. One of the things that I think is really good that SWIFT's doing is they are doing collaborations on innovation. They're doing a lot of testing out there to come up with new ways to effectuate payments in a secure fashion. In particular, they've had some success in doing cross-border payments, which is really cool. There's a big need for that out there to be able to do that. So I don't necessarily see the SWIFT is going to go away. I think they're going to continue to find ways to innovate, collaborate, and continue to grow. And when it comes to APIs expanding, I do think that it will help TAs. On the outside, it might seem that they are efficient for connectivity on a secure basis, but when it comes to complexity of payments and bank accounts, APIs by themselves are not necessarily good alternatives to a Treasury aggregator. I think they will work together versus work apart.
Good answer. I was trying to stump you, and you did a good job with that. This expansion, I would liken it to phone systems. Like not nearly as many people have home landline systems as they used to. Right, that's been diminished. But you still need a phone. It just has moved to a cell phone, a digital phone, a soft phone across the board. And so, if you're connecting to a single party, you don't need an aggregator. You don't need a host-to-host connection. If an API works, you're going to do that. But the more you have to connect, the more you have to transform, the better it is to use aggregation functions. And whether they're connecting to some banks with host-to-host, because that's all they offer, some are available through networks and some are available through APIs, and more are available through APIs over time, whether it's for information reporting or payments. This allows you to isolate those changes with another party as opposed to handling all those changes, the death by 1,000 cuts. There's a lot more to, connectivity strategy, services, firms like Strategic Treasury help people make decisions about technology, help implement it. Providers in the analyst report show a number of providers who can help describe and, identify how they solve these different challenges, how they continue to grow and change over time and help many, many companies. So a lot of development there. Paul, any final thoughts on Treasury aggregators before I do a quick run through on the webinar?
Yeah, just maybe a couple of things in terms of what's changing out there. A couple notes on, faster payments. A lot of people out there are demanding faster payments, but at the same time, they're also going, well, does that mean faster fraud? I think these systems can help. The new technology can help manage or mitigate those risks that are associated with that. Certainly going to continue to see an increase in faster payments, I believe. I also think data management is just uber important to organizations today. Treasury aggregators are really good at managing data and helping organizations get data as systems and doing it securely. So I think Treasury aggregators are just really beneficial in that area. So I think we're just going to continue to see an expansion in capabilities when you have AI, APIs helping support or foster the use of newer technologies. I think you're going to see, whether it's Treasury aggregator or a TMS, you're going to see these platforms utilizing these tools to help organizations continue to manage data, manage risks, and effectuate payments securely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. The webinar for that goes over the analyst report on Treasury aggregators will be held on February 5th, 2025 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's Eastern Time in the U.S. You can look up New York time if you're in another time zone. Thank you so much, Paul, and thanks everybody for listening. And finally, in the show notes, you can see the link to download the analyst report. If you go to our website, there's quite a bit of additional information you can get for free just by filling out a simple form. Thank you, Paul.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.